Hey guys, first off, I want to say thank you for 20,000 YouTube subscribers. That's crazy. I never thought I'd be here. When I put out my first video, I had no intentions of actually getting views and it just popped off. So it's really crazy for me to be sitting here with 20,000 subscribers. I was initially planning on putting out my build for the Poison Shred Stormclaw hybrid, but I decided I wanted to talk to you guys about the future of my channel. Thank you guys for subscribing and being a part of my community. And I also wanted to show you guys a list of all of the Druid changes I'd like to see going forward. The sad reality of the situation right now is that Druid is not competitive unless you're running Poison Shred. That means that our entire class is pigeonholed into one skill. That's not fun for anybody, so I'm going to go through and show you all the things I want them to change. I'm also about to start investing some time into Throne and Liberty, which is an MMO that I've been looking forward to. So as Season 2 is slowing down, I just want to let you guys know that I'm going to be here for Season 3 pumping out builds just like usual. And I think you can understand why I'm not so motivated to just put another Shred build out when there's already so many floating around. But like I said, for those that want the Stormclaw Poison Shred hybrid, you can find that build in my unpublished builds on my Mobalytics profile. This list will be posted below the video, so if you want to check this out and read through it yourself, feel free. So these are the changes I want to see for Druids. I want to see more love for basic skill builds. I want them to buff rapid, increase damage scaling on basic skills, add a glyph that scales with basic skills because right now there's nothing. I want to see new Paragon boards that have basic skills in mind. And in the skill tree, I want to see passives that affect basic skills. I'd like to see Wind Shear replaced with something that's ranged and utilizes poison damage, because basic skills don't really have poison damage outside of the one thing on Claw. And I'd love to see a buff on Seismic Shift so that we can actually utilize it in builds. It should buff the damage, and that damage should be affected by what item it's put on, so like Two-Hander or Amulet. And it'd be cool if it casts 2 spikes instead of 1. We need more love for poison builds. We need an ult that interacts with our poison, so Lacerate, for example, could be a good choice. Lacerate could increase our poison damage on a target by 10% for every hit that it does. Rabies needs to be buffed. It would be nice if it was ranged somehow, or there was a better way to put it on enemies, maybe as an AoE. And we also need some kind of utility to reset the cooldown, because as it is right now, it's not nearly as good as Poison Creeper for poison. I'd love to see Poison Creeper as an actual summon, rather than something that just kind of moves around in the background. It'd be really cool if it was multiple little Ents that charged at enemies and exploded into an AoE of poison. And for our alpha aspect that turns our wolves into werewolves, they're supposed to apply rabies, which they do, but they need to apply it more often, so them vomiting poison onto enemies or, applying it more regularly is what we need there. Maybe our wolves could just be infected and everything they go near automatically gets infected. We need more love for companions in general. So for our wolves, they need to be reworked completely. It'd be nice to see them be fully passive companions that are just semi-tanks and also a source of damage. It'd be nice if they had a little bit of AoE, and also we need to be able to modify them with werewolf modifiers, because right now, even if you turn them into werewolves with the alpha aspect, you don't get the werewolf buff on them, which means we can't scale them properly. And I personally think that werewolf should be on them by default, so the alpha aspect could be changed. I think that ravens should deal a substantial amount of damage, and they should apply vulnerable to enemies. And not just when we cast an active, but they should be constantly flying in and attacking enemies and applying vulnerable. Especially with vulnerable now being nerfed, there's no point in restricting us from having a way to apply that vulnerable more consistently. Also, ravens need to be able to be scaled as well, so maybe having them become storm or whatever you can use to modify them and actually give us a bonus would be nice. I think we should also have bear companions. It's kind of weird that we have wolves, but we don't have bears. Obviously, these would automatically get the werebear passive by default. And I imagine these being tankier. Maybe they pull aggro and do like a low damage AoE, or apply some type of crowd control. I would really love to see a way to swap the elements and the types of abilities way more often. There's many situations where I'm like, oh, if only this could become a werebear skill, or if only this could become a storm skill, or if only this, it's constantly wishing that there was something else. I would love to see something like a storm version of Pulverize that behaves a little bit differently. So maybe you smash down and lightning bolts cascade across the field or something along those lines. Now, I know Druids don't have fire, but fire tornadoes sound really cool. But having some other way to modify our tornadoes, maybe earth tornadoes or poison tornadoes, something like that would be nice. For innate earth and bulwark, I feel like since it got nerfed, I would rather see it become a storm skill, and then we can reverse the synergy on symbiotic. That way we can still have that bulwark spam even if we're using a different type of skill. Now these are my miscellaneous thoughts, but there are a lot of them, so bear with me. I would like them to buff Endless Tempest for better uptime. That'll help us keep our Dolmen Stone active and allow more variation on that build, because as of right now, you have to run Symbiotic to make Dolmen Stone work. I think they should make Grizzly Rage permanent again for Unstoppable, because right now it's in this awkward spot where it lasts 6 seconds, but not the full duration. You can't do anything else during that time. I don't know. It's really bad. So it either needs to be the whole time, or they need to give us some other options of unstoppable. Speaking of which, if they buffed unrestrained as a passive, then we could build into that, and getting 3 points in that would hopefully reduce CC to the point that we would no longer be instantly killed if we get CC'd. So maybe something like a 75% reduction or something relatively large. It already takes 5 points to build into that, so you may as well give us a decent bonus. I want to see them buff the Lacerate ultimate so that it's our best option on ultimate for single target damage. Right now, there's a lot of things that buff ultimate damage, but we don't really have ultimates that deal damage. Cataclysm is our only option when it comes to that. So this one would be really nice as a single target DPS option. Like I said before, it could increase the poison damage on enemies by 10% per swipe. It should prioritize the highest HP target. They should make the whole combo much faster. So for example, right now when we cast it, it's like 2 seconds that we're sitting there waiting for it to finish. It should be something like 1 second. And I think they should reduce the cooldown to 30 seconds as the base. Now, even with 30 seconds as the base cooldown, they need to buff the damage. The damage on this ultimate is not enough. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this one, but I think making Ursine's Strength a bear exclusive will clear up some of the confusion, because some people don't realize that 25% damage also applies to other things besides bear. But aside from that, I think that by making this exclusive to bear, it's going to make some of the other passives more competitive. But they could just fix that by buffing the other passives, so I'm not sold on this one. In line with that, I think buffing Lupine Ferocity so that's every 3rd hit would work. And damage to injured enemies is kind of a pointless stat. I really wish they would just buff the damage on this. I think they should reduce the time to get the bonus on Bestial Rampage to 1 second. It's really awkward that you have to wait 2.5 seconds. I would like to be able to just hit my Debilitating Roar or hit my Trample and, I've got the bonus after a second. That's a slight delay. It's still going to stagger you a little bit, so you have to wait in that bear form. You can't instantly change. But 2.5 seconds is too much. It feels really bad. I think they should buff Perfect Storm. Honestly, 90% of the time, I forget that Perfect Storm is even a Keystone passive. It's really bad. This is something you would use early game for some Storm stuff, but that's about it. I think they should buff it to about 30% damage and give a way to modify it so it can also be used for Earth. And even with this much increase, I'm not convinced that this will be enough, but at least it's a start. This is kind of in line with what I said before, but give more ways to make Werewolf into Werebear or vice versa, and Earth into Storm or vice versa. Now, I'm sure they think that this should be a thing for some reason, but lightning and storm damage should be the same thing. There's so many spots where storm is said, and then other times where lightning is said, and they for some reason decide to make these different from each other, and it's very confusing on what applies to what. So I think they should all just say storm. Also, I'm going to add something real quick. I think that all lightning strikes should be bolts for the electrocution glyph. So right now, there's this weird distinction between bolts, which are things like Bad Omen, Rune Workers, and then the other thing for electrocution is the Lightning Dancer. And then you have strikes, which are Lightning Storm and Cataclysm. It's very odd that these are in a separate category and that the strikes don't work with the electrocution glyph. I think they should be the same thing across the board, and they should label them as such. And if they need to nerf the electrocution glyph to compensate for that, fine, do it a little bit. I think they should make Cyclone Armor pull enemies in instead of pushing them away. That'll clear up a lot of the annoyance when you're using a symbiotic build and you're spamming Bulwark and you're constantly pushing things away. I think Trample should knock back enemies in a line in the direction that you are charging. Right now, if you trample through enemies, they're going to split and go all different directions based off of where you hit them. Instead, these enemies that are like this should just move this way. I think they should fully remove the knockback from the spinning boulders and maybe stagger enemies that are hit or have them immobilized or something like that. They should make the circle on the spinning boulders smaller, so that not only can you hit enemies that are in melee range and know that close damage is the way to go, but also so that you can deal damage inside a suppressor mob's circle reliably. I think they should remove the double dip from Shred. It's kind of weird that there's only this one thing that is double dipping and you can't get that from anything else. It automatically makes it imbalanced. I think channeling abilities should have the ability to overpower, and if anything, they can nerf it to have a reduced effectiveness with channeled abilities, because as of right now, it's just kind of awkward. You can't build around that. They need to buff Human. Make Tempest Roar and Vasilis feel less required in builds. Or if they're not going to buff Human, at least get rid of all of the stuff that benefits being in human form, like the glyph, because what is the point if you can't have a build that's as good as the others? Make Spirit regenerate on its own. Dealing with Spirit is not fun. I don't think anybody has fun managing Spirit. That should make Shred feel less clunky and more responsive. I actually thought that Shred would be the ability I like the most in this game because I like fast, I like dashing, I just like zipping around and killing things. It can feel that way sometimes when you are dashing a lot, but it also feels clunky at the same time, so they just need to rework it a little bit. They need to give more skill options that lean towards single target or AoE damage. Too many builds are dead because they can't DPS a boss well enough. You run into this with stuff like Lightning Storm. With Lightning Storm, all they have to do to fix that is change Lightning Dancer so that the little things that move out and seek enemies hit the boss. If there's nothing else around, they should hit the boss. They need to give you ways to be able to counter the problems with your build. Some builds just don't have an option to be able to do more single target damage. They should make Maul feel less clunky. Right now, even if you build attack speed, it feels weird attacking with Maul. They need to change the safeguard passive to max life instead of base life. They should make it to where disobedience drops slower over time, because as it is right now, you just lose your bonus so quickly that it's kind of not a safe choice. I think they should change Dolmen Stone to a ring, because right now you can't use things like Banished Lord's Talisman, and you're missing out on the 50% bonus from amulets. I think they should make Nature's Reach work with the Thunderstruck legendary node, because right now it doesn't. I don't know if it's a glitch or not, but that's a big amount of damage to distant enemies that should be applied to the Thunderstruck node. I think they should buff the Clarity passive, because right now you're not getting that much spirit from it, so even if you are shapeshifting, it's like, okay, thanks. I think they should buff the Charged Atmosphere passive. It takes way too long for one lightning bolt to come down, so it definitely needs to do something else. Maybe they could reduce the cooldown to something like 6 seconds, and then give it a 5-second damage buff to the enemy that was hit. Something like that. I think they should change elemental exposure to be 3 seconds by default, and when you add more points, it should increase the chance by 10% each time. I think they should completely change Nature's Resolve and Thick Hide to something else. One could become Increase Unstoppable Duration, and I'm not sure what to do with the other one, but both of these are kind of awkward, and I don't really like them. I think that the innate Blood Howl passive should be 30 spirit instead of 20. It doesn't really feel like you're gaining much from 20 spirit. I also think they should buff or replace Natural Hurricane. 15% chance to apply Vulnerable doesn't feel worthwhile to me when I could have a 20% damage reduction from the other side. It's basically a non-choice. I think they need to improve the pathing to some of the legendary nodes. Constricting Tendrils, Heightened Malice, Thunderstruck, and kind of Ancestral Guidance are all not great for pathing to the legendary node. If you have to go all the way to the opposite side of a board from where the glyph is, you're basically not going to grab that unless you come in at the end and just grab the legendary node. It's very awkward, and I would much rather have the ability to get it without all of that. I think that they need to improve a lot of the glyphs. There's some that I've basically never used. Let's see, we've got Guzzler. Change the bonus on this. The potion thing is not something I am interested in at all. Even though it's got a decent flat damage increase, there's other things that have a good flat damage increase that have a better bonus. Poise, this one is pretty bad. Shapeshifting should give a 100% chance for a 10% barrier for 6 seconds. Otherwise, they need to rework it and do something else, because I've never had any inkling of wanting to use this. And that's coming from someone who's constantly like, how can I get barriers? Shapeshifter right now gives a 20% chance to crit separate from your normal crit rate. I would much rather this add 20% crit chance to shapeshifting abilities. Tectonic, I think, is a decent one, but for Earth, I would like to see the bonus from Tectonic, which is the 15% lucky hit chance, swapped with Spirit. So Spirit would end up with critical damage, just straight critical damage, not Earth critical damage, and then a lucky hit bonus. And then Tectonic would have the critical strike damage, and enemies take increased damage, times X, whatever. Because that would allow the lucky hit chance to be used by other builds. And Bane, this one is a little bit awkward because most builds that use poison for utility, which means that this is only going to be used for builds that are using poison for damage. So if you're using poison for damage, they should at least up the chance for double damage on poison to at least 25%. And right now it says to your damage over time. This should just be poison damage in general. All right, these are the legendary nodes that need buffed or reworked to feel good. So Inner Beast, right now Inner Beast is just giving like a spirit cost reduction. It's kind of awkward. It's only when you're shapeshifting. I'm not a fan. Constricting Tendrils is probably one of the worst. It is a lucky hit chance, which pretty small lucky hit chance, and it is based off of the base damage. It is not good. Not to mention, this is one of the hardest ones to actually path to without wasting a bunch of points. Less for Carnage is kind of a meh legendary node, but it is useful to some builds, and it's kind of easy to access, so I'm going to give this one a pass. But I could see this being better, even if they have to make it slightly harder to get to. I would still like to see this do more. Survival Instincts is interesting, but it's kind of awkward because you're getting more damage based off of the difference from your health percentage to the enemy's health percentage. Now, when is that useful? That is useful if you are on a low life build and you're doing damage to a high health enemy, or if you're high health and you're doing damage to a low health enemy. If you're using a build that typically uses survival instincts, like Pulverize, you're aiming with that build to one-shot enemies. You're trying to kill them in one big hit. You're usually going to kill them while they're healthy. So this becomes less useful in the builds that would actually use it. So it'd be nice to see this reworked so that it works for any type of build, or they should change it and just synergize with what Werebear already does, which is a lot of damage to high health enemies. All right, now these are the aspects that need to get buffed. I'm not going to say too much on these. I'll just kind of go through them. Elements, Audacity, Intercom, Nature Savagery. This one needs to work on the Werebear and Werewolf skills, because right now the Werewolf skills can reset the Earth skills and the Werebear skills can reset the Storm skills, but casting a Storm skill cannot make you automatically cast a Werebear skill, which is what I would like to see as the theory crafter. They also need to buff Retribution, Shared Misery, Aftershock. I would just like to see the damage higher on this one so we could do something a little more with a landslide build. Alpha, Changeling's Debt. This one seems good, but I can never get it to actually do what it should be doing. Dark Howl is just a choice I don't usually end up going with. Expectant, Stampede, Tempest. My god, the number of times that I've tried to make Hurricane deal damage because it sounds fun in theory, but it doesn't do anything. Ursine Horror, I feel like the actual damage numbers on it should be buffed because it doesn't feel like it does much. Even though it allows our Pulverize to access Earth stuff, I'd still like to see it actually deal some damage itself. Ballistic, Conceited, it's hard to keep a barrier up, so they may as well make the bonus a little higher. Unsatiated needs a rework. Assimilation, Balanced, Crashstone, they should just make this damage to crowd controlled enemies so that it actually applies to other things. Edge Masters needs to be a 40%. This doesn't even apply to stuff like overcharge and whatnot, so you may as well just buff it because it only applies to skills, and it makes you rely on having a full resource bar, so there's a lot of factors that make this need a higher percentage to actually be good. Lightning Dancers, like I said, it should seek the initial target if there's no enemies nearby. Mangled needs a full rework. Night Howlers. Overcharged, I just want to see the damage numbers increase if you put it on an amulet or a two-hander. Same thing with Rune Workers. I'd also like to see them lower the interval between the lightning strikes with Rune Workers, because as it is right now, you can stack up the crits faster than you can actually get that damage to go out by a significant amount. I'd like to see the interval reduced maybe double of what it is right now. Seismic Shift, we already talked about that. Smiting needs a rework. Damage to injured enemies is pointless. Starlight needs a rework. This one, if they changed it to overheal working for it, then it'd be pretty good. Mending Stone, like to see it work for all kills. Crowded Sage needs a rework. Deflecting Barrier needs a rework. Protector needs a rework. Earthguard needs a rework. Eluding needs a buff. Exploiters, I'd like to see it work on bosses by default. They could lower the damage to 20% if they need to for bosses. Skinwalker needs a rework. Storm Shifter needs a buff, and Vigorous, a little buff. Now finally, unique items and the changes that they need. You're going to notice a pattern on a lot of these. I basically want to add total armor to things because it's really annoying not choosing an item just because it doesn't have total armor on it. I think there's room for them to have items that don't have total armor, but they need to compensate in some way. So for Vasili's Prayer and Tempest Roar, I want them to change the resist to total armor. Godslayer, crowd control duration, change to total armor. And Dariel's, fix the life still, allow the poison to proc for X-Falls, and change the poison resist to a fat damage reduction from poison enemies. Mad Wolf's Glee, make the damage multiplicative, and change the move speed to total armor. I do like the move speed, but if I had to choose something, the move speed is what I would remove. And it just needs the total armor because it is not defensive enough to match up with other chest pieces. I don't even think it would be enough with total armor, but it's a step in the right direction. I think Razor Plate should, in addition to the Thorn damage, have the most HP of any item, something like 5,000, so that it's basically just 4 life stats on one item. Fists of Fate, I want to lose the chance to gain resources and add in attack speed and lucky hit. We'll still be losing crit chance, which is rough to lose, so these would at least make it feel less bad. For the Frostburn, I think we should remove the chance for resources and add in lucky hit chance. Probably also improve the freeze chance because that's the whole point of them. For Storm's Companion, make the wolves modified by all storm and lightning modifiers. Have them lightning blink to enemies and deal AoE damage every hit, and add total armor to make them more competitive with other pants. Tacits of the Dawning Sky, this is actually the most interesting one that I came up with, I think. But I want to make them give a constant 10% max resist to all elements, maybe slightly less than that, like 7% or something. And change the control impaired duration to total armor to make them more competitive with other pants. And then this is the part that I came up with that I really like. Make any overcapped resistances become multiplicative damage source. So when you're in World Tier 4, 120% means that you're at 70%. With these pants on, let's assume it's 10%. That means at 130%, you're at your cap. So let's say you are at 150% on 3 of your different resistances. That would total 60%, and then they could give us 25% of that as multiplicative damage, which ends up being 15% multiplicative damage. Sounds a little complicated, but I promise it's not as complicated as it seems. For Temerity, I'd like to see them change the potion drop rate to total armor and improve the chance to heal. Temerity is a pretty good item, but again, it feels bad not having the total armor. They could possibly compensate for this in other ways, but I think total armor is just one of those things where if an item doesn't have it, you have to try and hit that cap, because being just under the cap is way worse than being right over the cap. For Tybalt's Will, this is one I actually think they need to nerf a little bit as far as the damage goes, just to make other things more competitive. But I like to see total armor instead of potion capacity, and reduce the damage bonus to 25% instead of 40%. Penitent Greaves, I think they should keep the movement speed and cold resist, but remove the other 2 stats, and add total armor and lucky hit chance. It'd be very interesting to have boots that have total armor on them. So for the Ahavarian Spear of Lycander, you might think, does that actually need a buff? I think it kind of does, because I always feel worse when I'm on it, even though the shrine buffs are nice. So for an uber unique that's so rare to get, you may as well make it a little bit stronger. So I think the damage should be multiplicative, and I think the attack speed should be in the category 2. So if you cap at 100%, you can still go above that with this spear. Flesh Render, I think, just needs a straight rework. And Grey Staff of the Crone, this is more just for my personal wants. But I think that the crowd controlled enemies damage should instead be lucky hit chance to overpower with basic skills. One of the things that drives me nuts using a Stormclaw build is I don't have the ability to do anything with overpower. So this would be a very interesting dynamic where you could potentially overpower more often with your basic skills and actually get something out of doing that. For the Butcher's Cleaver, I think they need to change the critical strike chance to injured enemies to critical strike chance, just straight up. And that'll probably make that one good enough to use. Waxing Gibbous, I think the damage to injured enemies and life on kill should be a percentage critical strike damage, or multiplicative critical strike damage, I should say, and spirit on kill, just to make it synergize a little bit better. Again, Dolmen Stone, I think it should be a ring. Melted Heart of Seelig, I think that the core skill damage should just be a multiplicative damage of all types, so we don't have to worry about whether it's core or not. For Hunter Zenith, I just think that the werewolf bonus sucks. You just get a little bit of healing. It's kind of lame compared to the other stuff. Mother's Embrace, I think just straight rework. It's kind of annoying. I don't really use it for anything. Ring of Starless Skies, again, I think it needs a rework. I think ranks to core skills instead of core skill damage. And a 30% spirit cost reduction, just straight up, would be a better choice. And last but not least, X-Falls, they need to make it consistent with all damage over time, not just dots applied to enemies. So for example, Hurricane, it says damage over time, but it doesn't actually do any procs for X-Falls. And there are certain poisons that you can apply to enemies that don't work, like Endarials. Then I think they should just bump the chance for the lucky hit up a little bit. All right, guys, that is everything I've got for you. I'm hoping that at least some of these changes end up making it through. If you guys want to send this to your favorite developer, you can send it on Twitter or Discord or wherever you happen to have contact. Feel free to send it to them, because it'd be really cool to get some of these changes in. I think I have my finger on the pulse of Druid a little more than the average person, so hopefully this is well received and some of these things can actually happen. With Throne and Liberty coming out, I'm not going to have as much time to do stuff for Diablo, but I'm kind of done with Season 2 at the moment. So I'll still be here to answer you guys' questions and make updates to stuff if it's needed. But for now, my tentative plan is to start fresh with Season 3. I'm pretty excited about the leaderboards, and we'll see how that goes. But at the end of the day, I'm going to keep doing my best to try and make fun and unique builds. And not just for Diablo 4. I plan to play a lot of MMOs and ARPGs in the future. So I hope you guys will stay a part of my channel regardless. And on that note, Daddy Druid out.
Don't you worry. Unlike your father, I will come back.